Understanding how a carburetor works will help you be a better tuner. So today we're going to talk about Edelbrock carburetor boosters, how they work, how to identify them, and little tricks some folks want me to discuss. We got a lot to cover today, so let's get to it. Before we get too in depth on the booster, let's talk about how a carburetor works. So all carburetors work on what's called the Bernoulli principle, and I'm not going to get too in depth with it, but we need to cover a little bit of it to kind of understand the science behind it and why a carburetor works and why a booster works the way they do. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but if you want to learn a little bit more about it, I certainly encourage you to do so. So essentially what we really need to know here is airspeed increases into the carburetor, the pressure decreases. We're going to show you that here on this carburetor that I cut up and how that works within the carburetor itself. So the booster that we're going to talk about sits within the carburetor, and the area here that draws the fuel, this one happens to be an annular booster. This one is a straight or a down leg style booster. This area here is placed within the carburetor in an area to take advantage of that pressure drop or the decrease in pressure. What that does is it essentially creates a vacuum or a suction type effect, to put it really simply. So when there's less pressure here, there's area that needs to be taken up by something. That's what draws the fuel up through the booster, through the whatever delivery mechanism. Like I said, this is an annular style and that one was the down leg style, and delivers it into that space and into that airspeed that's coming through there. That's really the general idea around it, but there's a little bit of a science, I guess, in it with the Venturi. So by tapering that carburetor inlet, it increases the airspeed and the pressure drops. That's essentially what a Venturi is. It is that choke point that helps the air pick up speed and drop the pressure so we can start to meter fuel through it. And that's essentially the Bernoulli principle at work. Now, all carburetors need to see some atmospheric pressure, at least in this setup. Now, we can talk about a carburetor in a boosted or a blow-through type application, totally a little bit different, and I don't want to get down the rabbit hole too far on that. We've talked about a boosted, a blow-through style carburetor on another video. You can go reference that one if you want to see a little bit of the principles behind that. But today we're just going to talk about this type of carburetor and how it does it. And again, it allows, the booster has ports in it that allows that atmospheric pressure to get in there so it can help deliver the fuel through the bowl and the booster into the airstream of the carburetor. So there's a lot of things at play here. When we talk about the Venturi, the size of that bore or the hole, which is the Venturi area, needs to be large enough to support the amount of horsepower that you're trying to feed with that carburetor. That's why different carburetors have different size bores or Venturi in them to help feed how much air needs to go in there. And then now we need to determine how to meter enough fuel to mix with that air to give the engine what it needs. And we do that through the booster size, the type, the jet or rod combination, in this case a jet or a power valve and a Holley. All of those things come into play on how to deliver enough fuel for that carburetor to see to support the horsepower that you're looking for. Now again, the Venturi doesn't draw fuel through there. What the Venturi is designed to do is to give it the area so the atmospheric pressure can push through the bowl, and the pressure drop underneath or at the booster pulls the fuel through the booster, and it feeds the right amount of metered fuel to the engine. And that's where the jet sizes and rod and all those combinations come into play. So pretty complex little deal here, but kind of cool when you look at it and how it all works out. And once you kind of understand that, then you can understand, okay, I can see why an annular booster may work a little bit better. But also keep in mind that with a booster design, where that booster is placed within the Venturi, it makes a big difference. And that's why engineers spend so much time with where to put this booster within the airflow and where it's going to give the most use to it based on where the pressure drop is in the Venturi. And you can play with that with different bore sizes or the neck down in the Venturi of how much that restricts the airflow and draws in to increase the airspeed and subsequently get the pressure drop in it. And engineers will move those boosters around quite a bit. That's why you have a straight leg or a down leg style booster. It's just moving the booster up or down into the airflow to get it where it needs to be, so you'll get the right amount of fuel metered through the carburetor. So an annular booster will generally have a larger opening than a down leg or a nozzle style booster because it needs a little bit different signal to draw the fuel through the booster. So again, that's why it's critical to get that booster in the right place in the airstream, in the right pressure drop area, so it will draw fuel through there effectively. Now, one question I get asked very frequently is, if I've got an older performer style carburetor, can I put a newer AVS2 annular booster in it and get it to work? Then there's two answers to that. Well, they're both no, but the reason why it doesn't work is because, just we discussed there, you've got the booster sizes. It's going to potentially be in a different spot within the airstream, and you're trying to catch the right signal so it pulls enough air through there. The other one is, if you look at the Edelbrock carburetor, the Performer Series carburetor is offered in a 600 for the 1406. We'll use that as an example. Because that size, or CFM size, on the AVS2, it needs to have a little bit more CFM to allow for the right signal and the right airspeed going through there. So the AVS2 is only available in a 650, not a 600. So short answer to that is, will the 650 AVS2 booster work in a 600? The general answer to that is no. Later on this year, we're going to put that to the test. I will actually swap those boosters out into a different size carburetor. We'll give it a shot. We'll show you how that looks on the AFR. But I wanted to address that really quickly to talk about, can you swap those into different carburetors? Now, venturi size and booster size makes a lot of difference for a couple of reasons. One, how much fuel is going to get metered, how much airflow is going to get through there. But let's just talk about one other little detail here that's very important. Slower airspeed through the venturi means a weaker signal, so there's less fuel flow. A higher airspeed through the venturi creates a stronger signal meaning the pressure drop underneath the booster, and a stronger signal will flow more fuel. So there's a very, very delicate balance that engineers have to go through when they're designing a carburetor. The venturi size for how much air and how much horsepower you need to support, and then how do you position the booster in there, and how far down do you restrict the venturi to get the right signal. Lots of time here and a lot of development in it. So it's just another little thing to keep of. We can go back to the, putting the AVS2 booster in the old Performer. Probably another reason why that wouldn't work that well. Now, annular boosters in themselves create a larger signal, and so what that means is more fuel will flow through an annular booster, and so typically on an annular booster carburetor, the jet sizes are a little bit smaller in it, and it needs to restrict the fuel because you're able to draw so much fuel or more fuel because you've got a different signal for an annular booster. So you restrict how much fuel that carburetor can see, or how much is metered through there with a rod or jet change, and it helps keep that fuel level low at those lower RPMs or speeds. Drivability gets really good, throttle response gets really good. It's one of the reasons why the annular booster has been so popular and such a huge upgrade from the Performer Series carburetor, the AVS2. It just helps the drivability. So again, atmospheric pressure, the pressure within that the booster sees underneath it, the airspeed, the size of the venturi, how far it's neck down, really, really important things about it. So I just wanted to talk about that really briefly, or 10 minutes, however long this has been, so you get an understanding on it. So now let's talk about Edelbrock boosters and how we can identify those. Now, another question that I've gotten asked a few times, and I want to discuss it here because I haven't in a past video, and I want to show you this because I think it's very important when you start talking about carburetors and individual components and pieces. I've had a couple of folks ask about, let's say they've got a 600 Performer Series carburetor that's going to go on in their vehicle, but they lost one of the boosters, dropped it, broke it, whatever the case may be. Or they're thinking, I might need just a little bit more fuel in there, so can I put a booster, primary or secondary, from a 750 carburetor into the smaller carburetor? Answer to that is no, but also too, I want to show you how to identify that. No, we just talked about all those principles. The size of the venturi, where it's located within the airstream, all those things become very important, and these booster sizes and designs are not all the same. As I was preparing for this video, I realized that the little chart that I had is long gone. I have no idea where I did with it. I guess I didn't save it. Anyway, boosters are different part numbers within the Edelbrock system. And the nice thing is if you look at the top side of the booster, it will have it stamped in here. The primaries are here. On the secondary booster, it's here. Now, I'll show you some pictures of some examples of it, but if you look at it, there are some common sizes that are the same. If we want to talk on the AVS2 carburetor, the 1901, the 1902, 1903, and 1904, all use the same primary and secondary booster. When you look at the bigger carburetor and get out of the 500 and go into the 650, which is the 1905 and 1906, it uses a different part number. So they are a different design booster. The air bleeds are different. The way the fuel is metered through there is a little bit different. The restrictions that are inside of there, I'll show you that here in just a minute, are all different. So again, can you swap boosters out? You might be able to. It might run okay. I don't know. Again, it's something that we're going to test out this summer when we get into some tuning and show you how the AFR is affected by that when you change those sizes out arbitrarily. But that chart will be very useful. I will have this up on my website so you can download it or view it at any time. But what I am missing is if you've got a 1410, which is a marine carburetor, it's a 750, or if you've got a 1413, which is another 750 size, or the 1400, which is the emission controlled carburetor, or these other 500s, the 1403 or 1404. If you have those carburetors and you'd like to do this, take a look and see what number is on those boosters. And if you could leave that down in the comments below, I would love to have it. It'll help me confirm it. For whatever reason, I don't have any of those carburetors here. These were the sizes that I had in the garage, so it made it a little bit easier for me to pull this together. So we've got 85% of it, I guess. But if you've got those other carburetors and you'd like to leave them down in the comments, I'd certainly appreciate it. But just to wrap that up, again, it seems to be a more common question, and I get it. These are not service repair parts through Edelbrock. They're not available. Certainly in some special circumstances, if you've broken one, destroyed one, had a defective one, whatever the reason may be, I've seen Edelbrock send those out, but for whatever reason, it's just not a repair item or something that they sell separately. But anyway, just wanted to show you how to identify that. Again, I think it's important of knowing that carburetor and just how it all goes together, and what comes in which carburetor. So very, very important to know. Again, it'll be on the website for download. Let's start to talk about how fuel is metered through these boosters. Now, if you'll notice on these, they have been notched out. It took a little bit of Dremel to it. Pulled all of the other tubes out of it so we can kind of see it, and pulled the cap out of the back of this one because I want you to see how the fuel is metered through there. Now, on this one on the annular booster, these are both happen to be right side boosters anyway. It doesn't really matter, but I wanted to show this to you. If you look here on this channel, and where this is metered out of, where the fuel comes out of, this is drawn out of the bowl and up through the booster, and will come through this area here. It will go down that pathway, very large opening there for a lot of fuel to flow through, and then it'll go into the booster as it's drawn through, and then down through the rest of the carburetor and out to the engine. Very, very cool how that works, and the size of it all. I'd cut up a booster quite a long time ago, but I kind of forgot how big that cavity was. I'm sure on the straight leg style or that nozzle style booster, it'd be pretty close to the same. But very, very interesting to see that, and then see how big that opening. That is where your fuel and how much fuel has the potential to flow through there. Now, it's not going to be a garden hose of fuel going through there. Edelbrocks are very, very much conservative on fuel, and that's kind of the indication of how much that booster can see. Now, if you look on this other nozzle style booster, you can see that little pinhole in there, and that hole there references the another spot for atmospheric pressure. And the cool thing about that is, if you notice, that air flows right in there. So now a lot of people think with a booster it only flows fuel through there. That's incorrect. There is a little bit of air that is in there. One, because it needs it to help push it through there, but it's introduced through the booster, and there is air and fuel that goes through there. So I don't know that it helps a whole lot with breaking it up. An engineer could tell us a little bit better in that. I don't. I probably should have asked one or talked to one about that, but you do get some air that's introduced in there. But I think the airspeed and the size of the nozzle and how it's introduced into the airstream is what starts to break that up. And anything that does break it up before it hits a nozzle, I don't think it's going to matter that much. But who knows? There may be a little bit of science behind that I haven't looked into or tried to study and find out. But anyway, I just want to show you those and show you a little bit of bits and pieces about it, because the next thing we're going to talk about is a little trick. It's been around for quite a while, actually, that somebody figured out on how to restrict the air signal that comes in here to help increase the flow of the fuel. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is how to do that. But I'll have to warn you right ahead, it's something that I don't recommend, but you'll see when we get there. So let's talk about that next. Sometimes after a rod and jet change to lean out the carburetor in cruise mode, it also negatively impacts the idle circuit and leans it out as well too. So there's a simple way of richening that up that's not a permanent change on the booster. I'm going to show you that first, and I'm going to show you something that's a permanent change that you have to be careful of. Now, when we work on this side of the carburetor and making these types of changes, you absolutely have to use an AFR gauge. There's no way around it on this one, guys and girls. You have to run an AFR. You have to use it. There is no seat of the pants tuning anymore here. I don't like that term anyway. I don't like that way of tuning, but you have to run an AFR gauge. It's the only way you're going to get the data you need to determine if the changes you made were what you needed to make. So let's start off on this. We'll talk about how to do this step by step. What we're going to use is a stainless wire to restrict the bypass air bleed circuit. And what that is this little circuit here on the back, and not complicated, but like I say, it's a little bit it gets a little bit sketchy because now you're adding some wire into the circuit here. You need to be a little bit careful. Like I said, we're going to use AFR to determine whether this is correct or not. So I've got 3 different wire sets here. The larger the number, the smaller the wire. So we're going to start with the 30, and we're going to work our way down as we go through the tuning process. Now, when you use wire to restrict this bypass idle air bleed, it creates a larger siphoning effect, which draws more fuel. I know that sounds different. When you restrict this, you think, well, if I restrict it, it's going to give me less fuel. It's the exact opposite. Restricting that air bleed gives you more fuel. It's the same on the VRS carburetor. We talked about it. It's the same when you're tuning idle circuit or idle air bleed circuits on a big race carburetor. Smaller the air bleed or the smaller the hole, the more fuel you get. So a little bit opposite of the way you think about it. So you got to kind of be careful with it. So I'm going to show you how to wire this up. Since I've already got a little bit of a 28 wire, I'm going to show you that and show you how to wire restrict this air bleed. Okay, before we get too into this, I want to show you a little bit of what's inside of here. I went ahead and knocked that restrictor out of there, so you can see down in there. There is a little orifice right there. It's in an angle too, but we'll talk about that in just a quick minute. Get to focus. That's the little restrictor that we popped out of there. So that's the length of the wire that you need to stick in there. You don't want to go any further, because if you do, you're going to get into that that little idle fuel restrictor, and we don't want to do that. We just want to get this bypass air bleed, idle air bleed restricted down a little bit. Let me zoom back out here and I'll show you the angle that that's at. Now, I took the air bleed out of this one as well too. Let's stick a little drill bit in here, and you can see, let me do this one, it's a little bit easier to go through. You can see that it's at a slight angle. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see that, but it's at a slight angle, so when if you need to drill that out, we'll talk about that in a minute here. You'll need to make sure that you go in very carefully on that, because you just don't, like say, you screw this booster up, you're done. You're not coming back from it. So again, we just need to make the wire long enough to restrict this down and not go so deep in there that we get into that idle restriction circuit in there. So again, it's a lot of little details here, but if you want to try to do this, you got to be kind of precise. So we'll zoom back out here and I'll show you what we're doing here. I'll use the cutaway because I think it'll be a little bit easier. So all you're going to do is you're going to take the wire, you're going to bend it just enough that it'll go the depth of that little air bleed. Okay, air bleed's right there. See it? So when you put these together, get that out of the way. You can see that it's going to be kind of tight right in here. Okay, so that wire is going to go down between the booster and the main body of the carburetor, and that little tab, or the little bend that we're going to put in the wire, is going to stick into that idle air bleed, and what it's going to do is going to restrict that down. So let me pop that back out of here so you can see that. So like I said, you just got to bend that wire just a little bit, and then what we're going to end up doing, I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a little bend to it. And then what we're going to end up doing, that may even be a little too long, I'll trim that down. But then what we're going to do is this end's going to go into here, and then this end is going to wrap around the bolt head up there. So this makes it a little easier. So when this bolt goes through, we're just going to wrap this wire around it. Very, very, you don't need to go around it, 5-6 times. Just need to go around it once, and that's it. So essentially what that's going to look like is this right here. Okay, see that? So when that bolt gets run down, it'll secure it. You just barely tapped into there, and then that's all of the restriction it is just a little bit to restrict that air flow enough to create a different siphon for the fuel, and it will get more fuel in there on the idle circuit. That's all it is. When you need to remove it, if you don't want it or it's made it worse, just take the bolt out, take the wire out, and it's gone. It's securing the wire that's important, and then making sure that that little wire doesn't go too far in there, so it restricts the idle idle circuit restriction that we looked at deeper in there. So that's what that little mod looks like. Not complicated, and then you may have to switch wire a few times. This is why the AFR is so important, because right now that's the 28. If we go down in size a little bit and go to the 30, which is a smaller diameter wire, it'll let a little bit more air in and a little less fuel, and we can kind of see how that is. But that's why the AFR is so important, because it's going to tell you exactly how you did. So that's how you do that little restriction there on that bypass air idle air bleed. Now, like I say, you gotta be really careful with this because you don't want that wire to come out of there. That's why you need to make sure it's good and secured on there. And you know, it's probably not going to. It's just you don't want that thing floating around in your engine. So just be careful when you do it. The good news, like I said about that one earlier, is that one's reversible. It's easy to take in and out of there. Like say I used the 28 wire, but you can certainly go all the way down to 25, 26 is kind of the ballpark, and you know 30, 32 is kind of a good starting point. Now, like I said, the more permanent modification would be to drill that little restriction that's down in there that restricts the amount of idle fuel that goes through there. Again, that one's a permanent one, and again, if you screw that up, you're done. That booster's junk. It's a display piece on my bench, or a tool to use on my bench. There's no longer any use for it. So I'm not going to cover that modification here today. If you want me to do a separate video on that one, I will. But that one I'm just going to leave alone for right now. This one's an easy one to get a little bit more fuel on the idle side. But like I said, it is spending some time with an AFR gauge and learning how to use it and how to read it. And it will. That will make some noticeable effect to it. So anyway, that's essentially all that. So that gives you a really good overview of boosters and how they work, how to identify the Edelbrock ones, and a simple little kind of trick if you need a little bit more fuel on the idle side. Like I said, that's just really based on if you need to lean things out a little bit in cruise mode. So kind of important if you're in those situations where you go very severe on the chart and go really lean on the cruise mode. Sometimes it does have a little bit of negative effect on the idle, and that's an easy way to try to siphon a little bit more fuel through there. So if you got any questions on these boosters, like I said, they're not complicated. That principle we talked about at the front of Bernoulli's principle is a good one to kind of read up on. Anytime you learn a little bit more about what's going on with something, allows you to diagnose things a little bit easier and understand why things are happening and how one change you make might affect something else. So we'll certainly talk a little bit more about these as we go along, but I wanted to do this video just so it'll be a basis of some foundation of some stuff we've got coming up later on in the year when we do some more tuning that's going to involve changing the boosters around. I want you all to see that. I've had enough questions on it that now I'm a little curious to see just how dramatic those changes are, and I think they will be fairly dramatic. Just knowing that those are designed so much differently. So hopefully that gave you a good idea. If you've got any questions about this one, don't hesitate to leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them for you. And I guess we will catch you on the next one. We'll see y'all.